Yeah, greetings. I'm Larry Smith, Ohio writer and publisher of Bottom Dog Press in Ohio. And I'd like to begin with a quote. Passion for books is essential over profits. These are the books that risk the authentic voices, real emotions, challenging language, and innovative form. They are the cores, both works of art and works of social justice. I wanted to work as an editor to support books like these because I believed that those kinds of books had made me, saved me, and that they could make and save others. The editor is in service of the writer. The editor and the writer are in service of the book. The book is in service of an entire community. That's a quote from James Schott, an editor of an independent small press. And Ohio is very alive with independent small presses and magazines. And not long ago, Mary Weems and Nina Gibbons and I did a book called The Cleveland Poetry Scene, telling the history of the small presses and publishers and poets of this area. And I'm going to read a poem. I was struck by that line, how writing can save you. And this is a poem I wrote in my Mingo Towns and Memories book. It's called Why I Read Books. I am home from college, resting on our back porch in a webbed lawn chair, when Dad comes through on his way to the garage. I look up from my book, Anderson's Winesburg, Ohio, and he stops, takes a breath, and then he asks it, "Son, do you ever think of doing something instead of just reading a book?" I am struck, hard swallow, and shrug a simple smile. Dad is a railroader, always finding work, and I, his pathetic son right now, waiting to find a summer job. He disappears down the steps, but returns 5 minutes later for something he's forgotten. Ready now, I enter the house. "Wait, Dad, can I speak?" He turns from the sink. "Yeah, what's up, boy?" I am 20, yet glad to be his boy. "Dad, I want to answer you." He nods, and facing each other, I try. I don't know if I can say it right, but some of these books, well, they have honestly saved me and kept me going. We stand in that great quiet, two men sharing a felt connection, like a prayer offered and accepted. We are not the hugging Smiths, yet we both feel held. So books can, in a sense, save us, guide us, bring us through. Well, the book that I'm going to read from is called Mingo Town and Memories. There's two pictures of Mingo Junction on the cover of this book. Mingo Junction, Ohio, in the Ohio Valley, just south of Steubenville, north of Wheeling, West Virginia, a working class town. And much of Cleveland is working class. A lot of those values of family and hard work and getting by are a part of this area. So I think that the poems of Mingo Junction fit also with the area of Cleveland, Ohio. I did a book about Mingo Junction not long ago with a classmate of mine, and it's called Mingo Junction. It's in that Arcadia series, where it's 90% photos and 10% writing about it. But I did that with the help of the people of Mingo Junction who brought their photos and shared their stories. And I think that helped to inspire this book. The book, Mingo Junction or Mingo Town, has Mingo speak, has the town itself speak. Another writer, Patron, wrote a book about Youngstown, and I read it. It's called The Heebie-Jeebie Girl. It's a novel, and in it, Youngstown speaks. Youngstown is a character. So in this book, I allow Mingo to speak as much as I feel her. And I dedicated the book to the people of Mingo Junction. So Mingo is talking. Mingo's history lesson. Oh, citizens, let me share with you some history of our place. Before these steel mills and these railroads, before ore ovens and coal mines, before the drilling for oil, before old man Potter and his son laid out the lots and streets for us, before pioneers and frontiers and forts, and when old George Washington camped here drinking from our spring. Before Chief Logan and the Mingo tribe hunted and fished along these streams, there was just this clear water and this green earth, native animals, trees, and plants. Close your eyes. Let it rise before you, past reaching into present. Later, when others arrived with splendid foreign names, came houses and gardens, neighborhoods and schools, churches and stores downtown and on the street corners. The bottoms, the hills, all of it growing. People coupled and multiplied, mixed and spread. And I watched and smiled unjudging, happy to sense them, renewed in the now. Winter's dried and withered rosebush, rooted in the fertile earth, blooms again each spring. That's appropriate right now to the spring season and the summer with the blooming of everything around us. One of the key places in Mingo Junction is a diner, and I know in a lot of towns there's the hometown diner. This was called Patty's Diner. And again, Mingo is talking here. Don't tell me it's just about cooking and swallow that greasy spoon talk. It's a diner, for Pete's sake. Everybody knows that. You go there for breakfast special, bacon and eggs with a stack of toast, all served with coffee and conversation by a waitress who calls you sweetie and hun. The crowd changes, maybe neighbors, maybe people you went to high school with. If there's time, Joe, the owner cook, comes out to ask how's everything and how are your brother and sister getting along. Okay, the dinners aren't that best, except for Joe's fish on Friday, Marie's meatloaf on Saturdays, and Bertha's serving beef tips and noodles anytime. You learn what to ask for, and you always leave a tip, in bills, not in coins. Late at night, folks out drinking show up for a steaming plate of French fries with gravy, sparked with hot sauce or ketchup. Marie's mother makes those pies and those glazed Sunday donuts. Call it what you want. I know railroaders and truckers' name for it. A little piece of heaven. Patty's Diner. This is a poem. Another place in Mingo Junction is a wrecking yard, I guess we call it now, or a junkyard, and it's owned by Rocky. And it's just a field that used to be a cornfield, now has become a junkyard. But there's some strange beauty about it. It's both ugly and beautiful. And I wrote this poem some time ago. And it was published in a newspaper even downtown there, published anywhere. And Rocky's sisters cornered me coming out of church in Mingo Junction and said, "Hey, are you Larry Smith? Did you write that poem about Rocky?" And I was afraid to answer. And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, Rocky loves that poem. He's got it hanging in the junkyard." Here it goes, Rocky's Junkyard. Otto's farm grows junk cars, dead seeds in the mud. 3-cylinder block buildings handle the trade, while the dark entrails of engines hang from pulley chains. Tires, radiators, axles stacked to the roofs. Salvage, they call it now. Inside the main building, a barrel stove warms Rocky's wife, who takes calls and works the books. Rocky just grins and grabs his gloves, moves steady into the cold. Day and night now, the cars burn in winter light. It's a funny thing, my grandkids love Mingo Junction. Some of them live in Avon Lake, some live in Huron, Ohio, up here along the lake. But they love going to Mingo Junction, and they want to go to Rocky's Junkyard and Patty's Diner, and I love it. It's a nostalgia for me, and for them, it's like connecting with their grandparents. There's also a small store there called Pesta's Country Store, and this story poem, comes from there. At the country store. Outside of the town's country store stand two girls in high school jackets, their sports names scrawled across the back. Laughing at the greeting of cats, they enter, sidling their way back past stacks of canned goods and chips, pastas, plates and mugs, bottles of Coke and maple syrup, stacks of homemade T-shirts. Rich smells of fresh baked bread and flowers, coffee aroma mixed with fresh cut cheese, all of it pulling them to the meat counter. The tall one stops, leans towards her sister and says, "Remember now, she just lost her son in Afghanistan." The younger one nods, looks up into the face of the older woman. "Oh, Mrs. Murphy, we've come for Mom's chickens." The older woman smiles. "Oh, if it isn't Cheryl and Marie. So good to see you girls." Names form a sacred bond here. "How's your sister, Margaret?" Cheryl asks. "Oh, she's okay," the woman lies, not wanting to spoil their day, like the fish someone left out on counter. "Well, I've got your chickens already wrapped," she says, eyeing the fresh faces. At the counter, she touches each girl's hand. "You two be careful out there," she says softly into their eyes. "You know how we need you." A bell chimes as they exit the door. You can still go to Pesta's. Mingo Junction is along the Ohio River. I live now along the lake in Huron, Ohio, and water has always been a part of my life. And this one's called simply The River. There's a somewhat mythical feeling in this poem. The river. And we went down, boys and girls together in our school clothes, along the smelly creek, all the way to the river. Brambles and stones beneath our feet, we passed rails and mill gates. And there we stood, looking out in silence at the great river. Too wide to swim across, though some might have tried and drowned too young. And our teacher stepped in, allowing her skirt to rise to her hips like a cloud with her inside. And lifting her arms, she beckoned one by one to her side, where she blessed aloud our baptism, not to God, but to the water. And we, fish that lived inside, and it inside of us. Forever and forever, she simply said, you are one. And some laughed for joy, and some bowed their heads and cried. There's a lot of ritual every place. And when I go back to Mingo Junction, one of the things that gives me hope, and there's a lot of closed buildings. It's very economically depressed area, but there's this feeling of resilience and going on, and you see the children playing in the playground or near the school. This is called Morning Comes. The children carry the town in their hearts and minds like a prayer or poem learned by heart. And we nod to the gods of rivers and trees, to cats nested on porches and dogs running free through yards, and to these streets and houses so bent on surviving. And in the playgrounds outside of school, their clear voices rise above the sounds of the mills, like a morning flock of birds to the forgiving skies, to the forgiving skies. Again, growing up in Mingo Junction was a challenge in some ways. I remember when I went off to college and realized that not everybody knew a working class town. As a matter of fact, most of the people that I met in college were middle class from places like Shaker Heights and Mount Lebanon outside of Pittsburgh. So I wanted them to know Mingo Junction, and the press, Bottom Dog Press, its mission in part is to treat the underserved, and part of that is the working class people and the working class culture that is essential to me anyway. This is a poem written in a kind of tribute to my father. People in the Mingo and Ohio Valley have a way of surviving, as I said, and it's very basic. And I've studied Buddhism and Zen, and I find that kind of echoed in the simplicity and the basic values. This is called Things My Father Taught Me, so you'll hear his voice in this. Wakened by his footsteps as he dressed in morning dark, I'd lie there awaiting his call to rise and shine. He moved with purpose like the railroad. His hands wore the calluses of work. His eyes were dark pools of trust. He taught with what he was, with words like apples, sweet and tart. Trust the road that takes you. Let the saw do its work. The worst fear is fear of work. Let the shovel throw the dirt. Enjoy the work you do, and the job will answer back. Let the hammer drive the nail. Drawn down into his basement where our hair was cut, my brother and I sat round his heavy workbench, awaiting his words of manhood. We grinned to see him blush, look away to drills and saws, yet he spoke simply from his life. Women are there to be cared for. Love them as yourself. The wrong you make goes on until you claim it. Family blood extends to everyone. When you speak ill of another, you speak ill of yourself. And from the Father who never struck me, who seldom touched me, whose knuckles were Boy Scout knots, whose muscled arms were tools. When you begin to lie, you start to sell yourself. Don't confuse your wants with your needs. Hold the word that hurts. Kindness speaks through silence. This year, I wear his hat. Feel his touch inside this coat. Inside my voice, he speaks of what it means to be. He loved with what he was.